It was supposed to be just another Thanksgiving dinner: turkey, mashed potatoes, and polite conversation. But beneath the warm glow of candlelight and the scent of cinnamon, a storm was brewing. I didn't know it then, but that night would shatter everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and family. By morning, I was no longer a daughter, no longer welcome, and no longer safe. This is the story of how my family tried to erase me, and how I fought back. It started with silence. Pause for a second. You deserve a breather. Brew a cup of comfort and comment 1 if you're with us for the next part. I remember sitting at the dining table, watching my sister sin and push mashed potatoes around her plate. She was only 16, still trapped in that fragile space between childhood and independence. Her eyes kept flickering toward our father Darius, whose grip on his wineglass was far too tight. I had seen that look before, the creeping red flush up his neck, the simmering anger just beneath the surface. My mother, Marlo, sat stiffly beside him, poking at her food without touching a bite. It was the picture of a family on the edge, and I was the only one who seemed to notice the cracks widening. In an effort to cut through the tension, I asked Senan about school. She gave me a weak, almost whisper-soft, "It's fine." Before I could press further, Darius slammed his fork down on the table with a loud clatter that sliced through the room like a blade. He leaned back, stared straight at me with bloodshot eyes, and said the words that would change everything. "You're a burden. You can't stay with us anymore." At first I thought I'd misheard. The sheer absurdity of it, being told I was a burden by the man whose bills I paid, whose groceries I bought, whose electricity I kept running. It didn't register. The silence that followed was louder than his words. Marlo said nothing. She didn't defend me. She didn't even look at me. Sinan froze, her fork hovering in midair, her face pale with shock. "I'm 30, I said finally, my voice barely steady. "I pay rent. I pay for the internet, electricity, even the food on this table." But Darius didn't flinch. "This is my house, my rules, and I say you're done." Something inside me cracked open in that moment. Not from pain, but from clarity. I realized I had been living in a house built on obligation, not love. I pushed back my chair, calm despite the fire in my chest. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I simply stood, walked to the sink, washed my hands, and returned to my room to pack. Later that night, I heard them through the thin walls. Marlo's worried voice, Darius's cold response. "She's not our problem anymore." As I zipped up my suitcase, a knock came at my door. It was Senan, eyes wide with fear. "What just happened?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer then, but I knew one thing for sure. I was done being the one they leaned on while treating me like I didn't belong, and by the next morning, I was gone. I stepped out into the cold Chicago air with a single suitcase, no plan, and no message from the people who once called me family. All I felt was relief, a dull, quiet freedom wrapped in frost. I didn't cry, I didn't second-guess myself, I simply walked away. But the silence didn't last. What began as rejection turned quickly into sabotage. Within 24 hours, my phone lit up with alerts: failed login attempts on my bank account, password reset requests, unusual activity on apps I hadn't used in weeks. At first, I thought it might be a glitch. But deep down, I already knew the truth. It was Darius. It had always been Darius. He wasn't just satisfied kicking me out. Now he was trying to erase me in every possible way. I checked my accounts. Everything was still intact, for now, but I didn't wait. I called the bank, froze my cards, changed every password, activated fraud protection, and locked down my credit. Every move was calculated, cautious. I knew how my father operated. This wasn't just cruelty, this was control. Orion, my friend and the only person who had welcomed me without question, opened the door with a cup of coffee and concern written all over his face. "I don't get how they could do this to you," he said. "They didn't care about me," I replied. "They cared about the money." And now that I was gone, they were panicking. Not because they missed me, but because they missed the free labor, the financial support, the silent fixer. Without me, the lights wouldn't stay on. But it got worse. A few days later, I received a message from a distant acquaintance. "Your mom is heartbroken. Why would you abandon your family like that?" I stared at the screen in disbelief. My father had already rewritten the story. In his version, I was the ungrateful daughter who lashed out on Thanksgiving, stormed out, and left everyone behind. He was controlling the narrative, twisting the truth to turn people against me. And my mother? She wasn't correcting him. She never had. When I called my sister Sinan to confirm, her voice was small and cautious. "He's telling everyone you screamed at them and left without warning," she admitted. "Mom's not saying much, just that you were unstable." That was the final blow. Not the lies, but the fact that they were working. My own family was building a version of me that never existed, and people were believing it. That's when I realized something chilling. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted me erased. Orion put it best. If your dad can't control you, he'll control how people see you. And he was right, but I wasn't going to let that happen. So I did the only thing I could. I opened my phone, took a deep breath, and posted my side of the story. "Let me be clear," I wrote. "I didn't leave my family, they threw me out, and the only reason they're upset is because I was the one keeping the lights on." I knew it would bring backlash, but I didn't care, because for the first time, my truth was out there, and I refused to let them rewrite it. I had posted my truth for the world to see, and the world saw it. Some believed me, some didn't. But I had done what I needed to do. I had spoken up. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A few days after the post went viral, I began noticing strange things. A car that parked across the street every night and never moved. My trash bin, and only mine, tipped over in the early mornings. The feeling that someone was watching me, even when I was alone in Orion's apartment. I told myself I was being paranoid. But then Orion noticed too. "You've been acting different," he said one night, leaning against the counter. "What's going on?" "I think someone's watching me," I admitted, my voice low. "And I think it's him." It wasn't long after that I woke up in the middle of the night and saw a figure standing across the street, just beyond the reach of the street lamp. They didn't move. They didn't say anything. They just stood there, watching. By morning, I was on the phone with Senan. Her voice trembled. "I think Dad knows where you are," she whispered. "He had your address written down. He said you don't get to just walk away." That was the moment I realized this wasn't just harassment anymore. This was stalking, and it wasn't going to stop. He wanted me back under his control, and when that failed, he wanted me broken. I called the police. I filed a report. I changed the locks, set up cameras, installed motion sensors. I wasn't waiting for the next time. But he didn't stop. Instead, he came after the one thing he knew I couldn't defend, my sister. I was sitting at Orion's kitchen table when I opened a thick envelope that had been shoved into his mailbox. The return address read, Cook County Family Court. My heart dropped as I tore it open. Petition for legal guardianship. My parents were suing for full custody of Senan. My hands shook as I scanned the lies on the page. They claimed I was unstable, that I abandoned my family, that Senan was better off without my influence. It wasn't just another attack. It was war. They were trying to take her, not because they loved her, but because they couldn't stand the idea that I was still part of her life. "They're using her to hurt you," Orion said grimly, flipping through the court documents. "This isn't about her well-being, it's about control. Again." I called Senan immediately. Her voice broke when she answered. "Dad says if I testify against you, he'll stop being so strict with me," she whispered. But I don't believe him. "I don't want to be stuck here, Zara." "You won't," I said, my voice steady. "I promise." That night, I stayed up researching lawyers, preparing for court, and gathering every shred of evidence I had. Text messages, receipts, financial records, anything that could prove I wasn't the unstable one. They wanted a legal battle? They were about to get one. And this time, I wasn't alone. With the guardianship hearing fast approaching, I hired Rachel Sinclair, a tough, sharp-minded attorney with no tolerance for manipulation. She took one look at the court documents and said, "They're playing dirty, but we'll play smart." Rachel and I got to work. We gathered everything, proof that I had financially supported the household for years, records of neglect from my parents, and messages from Senan that painted a much different picture than the one Darius and Marla were trying to sell in court. It was a mountain of evidence, and it was solid. But just when I thought I had the upper hand, they escalated. Rachel called me into her office one rainy afternoon, her face tighter than usual. "Zara," she said, sliding a set of papers across the desk. "You need to see this." I picked them up. My stomach turned before I even read the first line. It was a sworn affidavit, supposedly written and signed by me, stating that I voluntarily relinquished all rights to challenge my parents in court, that I didn't want custody of Senan, and that I had no interest in being involved with them again. My signature was at the bottom, except it wasn't mine. "She forged it," I whispered. Rachel nodded grimly. Your mother, and if we hadn't caught it, they would have used this to destroy your case. My pulse thundered in my ears. This wasn't desperation. This was war. And then, the final blow, we discovered who had posted my father's bail. It wasn't Marlowe. It wasn't a friend. It was Jonathan Calloway, a name I had never heard before. Rachel and Orion helped dig deeper. Calloway wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was a silent backer of a law firm notorious for aggressive family litigation, and he had a history of funding shady legal battles when the outcomes benefited him. There's no way he got involved without a reason, Rachel muttered. And she was right. When Sinan, brave as ever, snuck into Darius's office and handed me a folder of confidential documents, everything became clear. Inside were bank records, email chains, and a signed agreement between Darius and Calloway. Calloway had paid my father thousands to keep me silent, to push me out of the picture, permanently. This wasn't just a family issue anymore. This was a conspiracy, one fueled by power and money. I handed the entire file over to Rachel. She flipped through it, her mouth set in a hard line. We're not just fighting for Senan anymore, she said. We're about to expose a criminal enterprise. The courtroom was no longer our battleground. It was the starting point of something much larger. And for the first time, they weren't the ones holding all the power. Rachel filed for an emergency hearing with the new evidence in hand, proof of identity theft, forged legal documents, and financial transactions linking Darius to Jonathan Calloway. It didn't take long for the system to respond. Within 24 hours, court orders were issued. Darius's bank accounts were frozen. A formal investigation into Calloway's financial dealings was launched. Their game of manipulation and shadows was being dragged into the light. The day of the hearing arrived like the calm before a storm. I walked into that courtroom with Rachel at my side, Senan in the row behind us, and Orion beside her, watching like a hawk. Across the aisle, Darius looked different. Not smug, not angry, but scared. Calloway wasn't present, of course. Men like him never walked into battle without pawns. Rachel stood first. Your Honor, she began, voice clear and confident, this is not a case about a troubled daughter. This is a case about deception, financial abuse, and a deliberate campaign to silence my client. Then came the evidence, the forged affidavit, the bank transactions, the email threads between Darius and Calloway, the recordings from the bug found in my apartment, and finally the signed agreement proving Calloway had paid Darius to keep me out of Senan's life. Each piece dropped like thunder in the courtroom. I watched Darius shrink in his seat as Rachel laid out the facts. He whispered frantically to his lawyer, but the panic was obvious. He hadn't expected me to fight back, and certainly not to win. Then came the judge's ruling. The court finds the guardianship petition to be not only baseless, but an act of manipulation. Furthermore, due to credible evidence of fraud, forgery, and criminal intent, the matter will be referred to the state prosecutor for criminal investigation. I closed my eyes and exhaled. It was over. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different. Clean, sharp, alive. Reporters swarmed, but I didn't stop. I didn't need to speak anymore. The truth was already out, and the lies had collapsed. Orion was the first to reach me. You did it, he said, voice warm, proud. No, I replied with a tired smile. We did. Sinan stepped forward, her hand slipping into mine. She was safe now, free from the toxic grip that had held us both for so long. We walked away together, hand in hand. Darius was arrested 2 days later. Marlowe was named in the fraud investigation, and Calloway's firm fell under legal scrutiny. Their power, the illusion of it, unraveled quickly once the truth was exposed. For the first time in my life, I was no longer the fixer, the scapegoat, or the silent one in the corner. I was the one who stood up, and I won. I had fought for my voice, for my freedom, for my sister, and I refused to be erased, because in the end, the truth always makes its way to the surface. And when it does, it burns everything built on lies.